All right, guys, we're gonna be making empty bowls. And so for this process, let me walk you through the tools we're gonna use, also some of the techniques. So to start off, we're gonna be using a rolling pin to roll the clay out. You might need some guide sticks. I'll demonstrate that. This is called a rib for smoothing clay out. We also have a fettling knife and a needle tool. These are tools we can use to cut the clay. You probably will not need both, one or the other. I prefer the needle tool, okay? A small cup, about halfway filled with water, just for some water. A sponge is handy. And then also we're gonna be using a plaster mold that we're gonna form the clay over. Okay, so to start, let's go ahead and start with the basics. We put all this material aside. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna roll out some clay. So all of you will be receiving about a pound or a pound and a half of clay, okay? Here we go. We're gonna take the rolling pin and we're gonna roll this out. So a couple of tips when you're rolling this out. As you're rolling the clay out, we actually want to make sure we're not pressing too hard on the edges. It thins the clay out. So if I press down too hard like this, it's gonna make it uneven in thickness. You can see that from the side. So what we wanna do is work our way from the middle out to the edges. Okay? We also want to flip the clay over as we're rolling this out. So as I'm going to be flipping the clay, working it from different directions. One reason why we flip the clay is one, it doesn't stick to the table or the board, but two, clay actually has a memory. And so if I only roll one direction, the clay is gonna warp. So by just flipping it over and working different directions, I'm gonna be making it, one, not stick, and just even out the thickness as well. Now, if you're afraid you might go too thin, that's where the guide sticks come in. So we're gonna put our guide sticks on the side, and the guide sticks are gonna help guide the thickness of the clay. So all we do is just roll this out back and forth. Again, we're gonna flip it on occasion, just like this. If I wanna go a little bit wider, I just spread the guide sticks out a little bit wider, just like that. And so we roll. Now what's gonna happen is the guide sticks are gonna prevent me from going any thinner with that clay. So I just go like this. Pretty simple, back and forth, back and forth. Now this is a great opportunity to start talking about the surface. So we want quality. And so if you have any imperfections in the clay, we need to kind of remove that. So you can either use a sponge, I'm gonna get most of the water out of it, and I'm very simply going to smooth the surface over. So this is one way you can do it. I also can use a rib, so here's a rib, and I can also take this and very gently using the edge of the rib, I can gently smooth that surface over this way as well. Okay, we just want to make sure that we have good quality work. Okay, I'm going to use a template, and I noticed that I didn't roll this out enough, so let me roll it out a little bit more. See if I can get a little bit bigger slab. Okay, so I'm going to use my template, put my template on here, and I'm then going to cut off the excess clay. So I use my needle tool, and I'm very simply going to go like this and just trace my template. Now we do have templates that are bigger, some that are smaller. This is kind of a medium-sized one. So here's a bigger one, for example. So you'll choose depending on the size of your mold. So here's the mold I'm gonna use for this. The template's bigger than the mold. So scrap clay, we're gonna save. I'm gonna set aside for right now. Okay, so I have my slab. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna smooth the edges. So again, I just get a little bit of water. I don't want it soaking wet, just damp. And I'm very simply gonna compress with a sponge those edges so that I smooth them over. A crisp edge with clay, believe it or not, a really sharp edge is going to chip really easily. It's also, if you have like a coffee cup, a curved edge is smoother and easier to drink from, and it just feels better on the lip. So we're just going to smooth that over. And same thing on the back side. Now if you notice, I'm not using a lot of water. I don't want this to be like soaking wet, and also don't want to have a big mess with the clay. So I'm just going to smooth that out. If you happen to have an imperfection in the clay, let's just say you get a fingernail mark, okay? And you're like, oh man, what do I do? You can take a little bit of clay. I'm just going to put a little water on there. I'm going to score real quick. Take my little piece of clay, gently press it in. I'm going to use my rib. I'm going to very gently work that clay back in to smooth it out. Just like that. Okay, so let me just finish up compressing that edge. Nice and smooth. All right, so we're gonna be using a plaster mold. So here's my mold. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my mold, lay it down, take my slab, I'm gonna try and center it. So what I'm actually feeling how far my fingers go underneath. just using them as a guide so I kind of have it somewhat even. Once I'm pretty happy with that, I very gently and slowly begin to kind of press down the clay and work it down the sides of the form. Now, I'm going to pause here. This is where some aesthetics come in. You have some personal choices. If you want to have, let's say, a wavy edge, you could play with the edge and begin to tease this and have it be fanned out almost in a floral-like design, right? We don't need to have, per se, a perfect cereal bowl. So we could use that if you want to. If you want to have a perfect edge, then what I'm going to do here, I'm going to begin to compress this down, and I'm going to work my hands around this. If you cut too much extra clay, like I know right now, I can just kind of feel it. The clay is touching my board here, or the table, whatever you're going to be working on. I'm actually going to trim that off. So here's a couple of ways you can do it. If you just don't need to trim off a little bit, I'm going to use my guide stick. I'm going to take my knife. I'm going to gently press it right here so it's level. It's going to hold it. I'm very simply going to turn this. So I'm going to do it on this side. You guys can see it also. So again, I'm just going to put my knife on a guide stick. Very simply, just kind of draw a nice even line all the way around that I can cut. That's one way. Another way, if you have another mold nearby, I can put this on top like this, okay? I very simply can hold this and I can just draw a line. I'll do it this way, you can see it. I can just draw a line this way and cut that off, okay? If you happen to have access to, thank you, a banding wheel, this is another great tool. I can use this and this will spin. I can very simply hold my tool steady. So I'm going to do this right here. I'm going to draw a line first where I want it to cut, so I have this concentric circle. Then I'm very simply going to come back in and trim this up. So I'm just going to cut into that as I'm cutting the clay. And so for you guys here, I'm just going to go like this, insert this, and slowly cut that line so it's nice and even all the way around. All right, so I'm going to continue that real quick. Take the excess off. Now I all of a sudden know I have a rough edge again. So again, I need to take a couple seconds, think about good craftsmanship, and we're going to smooth this over. So very simply going to get in here and take my sponge. And the goal here is not to thin the clay out. I don't want to make this slab any thinner. The goal is just to smooth that edge over and compress it so it's a little bit more functional and better, like visually appealing. And there we go, okay? Now I have this. Now this is gonna be a simple little bowl. I can let this sit on here for a little bit. I can get a blow dryer and blow dry it if I want to. But because it's so small, this will actually hold its shape relatively well. You kind of gently tease this off. Okay, so I have my bowl shape. So if I flip it over, my mold will come out and I have this bowl shape. But again, I need to smooth that over right there. If I blow dry it, it'll speed up the process a little bit. But I have a simple little bowl. I'll then come back in. I would smooth this edge over. So I'm smoothing that. Okay, I'm going to support it. And just very simply and very gently smooth this edge. Now you can use your fingers too for this. But again, if you notice my hand, I'm supporting that outside edge. We don't want to have any sharp edges on what's called a lip, on this lip. So we just continue to do that all the way around. All right, so now we could be done. So here's a little bowl, this could be done. If you wanted to put something on the interior, okay, you could. If you want to, for example, let's say, make a little Cheerio, for example, and you want to make something sculptural, you can make little adornments, little additions called applique. So I'm going to take a little piece of clay like this. I could cut a little hole in the middle of it, right? I could probably stamp that or cut this. I'm going to make a little Cheerio. Now, whenever I add something clay to clay, I'm going to want to score, okay, to create slips. So I'm going to actually put a little water on there. I'm going to score the This is critical for it to stay on there. Again, a little water. I do this at least twice. Okay, and then I would score. Let's say I want this right in the middle there. I would score here as well. Not the best Cheerio ever. But I go like this. I'm going to score real quick. Again, you don't need a lot of water, just a little dab with the finger. Score. And then we can add your little piece on there. So whether you do a little koi fish, right? You want to do, I don't know, some Cheerios or some Fruit Loops, right? I have a little Cheerio in there. That's good. Now, if you don't like it, nice thing with clay, just kind of remove it. Take a sponge or take a rib and you just smooth that over. Again, we want quality and good craftsmanship for this. Now, let's say you want to put a foot ring on it. So let's say what a foot ring is. I'm going to show you an example. Here's a piece right here by a former student. There's a little bit of a raised foot right here, okay? This would be called a foot ring. Let me show you how to do that. What we're actually going to do is we're going to put this back on the mold. I'm then going to use some scrap clay. So I'm actually going to shift this over. And so I can use some scrap clay here. I can cut this down and I'm actually going to roll a coil. So when I roll the coil, very simply from my heel to my fingertips, I'm going to roll this out into a worm-like shape. Okay? If you want a longer one, you just use a bigger piece of clay. And then this will go around the bottom. I can have that. If I want to, I can play with this. So for example, I could cut this up into sections. So I'm going to cut this up into somewhat even pieces. I'm going to smooth the edges over real quick. All right? I'm just going to eyeball this for now, but once I smooth these all over, again, I'm not attaching quite yet. They're going to go opposite. I'm just going to play with it first to see if I like it. So that could be a potential foot ring, right? Now, I could go, I wouldn't do just one or two, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a longer one, show what that will look like, and we'll attach this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this, I'm going to cut the clay real quick, I'm going to roll a coil out, make it round. Okay, rolling. So you have this nice long worm, right? Easy enough. Then we can just add this all the way around. So I'm going to take this, overlap it. Little trick of the trade, if I want it to be perfect, fitting perfect, I'm going to overlap these two. I'm actually going to cut down at a 45-degree angle just with the coil, take the excess out, and that gives me a nice, perfect one. I don't want to make the foot ring too narrow. There we go. Take this off. Nice score. So a little bit of water. Okay, I'm going to score. So get in here like this. Again, whenever you add clay to clay, this is a must. The clay will not stick to itself magically. You have to help it and encourage it and do the work. So a little bit of water on there. I'm going to go the opposite direction. And I'm going to score pretty generously. And then ideal scenario, I'm going to score this as well. So I'm going to score the bottom part. So again, I get water on here. So I'm scoring both surfaces. And I'm just going to score. Whew. A little bit of water. Now you can use a sponge for water. I just use my finger real quick. And I go the opposite direction when I'm scoring, so it's like cross-hatching. Just like this. All right, doesn't look pretty yet. Flip it over, put it back down. I want to make this a little bit smaller. So, again, 45-degree angle. Take the excess out. Now I'm going to very simply just press this down and work this down. Connect that together. Okay, then I'm going to begin to weld this together and attach this better. So just by simple pressure, pressing down a little bit, and then I see a little bit of an edge there, so I can come back in, a little bit of water, I can begin to smooth this out. Now, if you want to make it look seamless, you can always blend that in better. Clean this up on the inside again. All right, now, one question might be, okay, how do I make this flat or even? Okay, just take your time. And then what I can do here, I can take another mold. I could take something that's flat. Don't use a rolling pin. What I'm going to do here is I'm very simply going to use this mold. Gently, you can use a paddle. And that will flatten that out just a little bit. Now we have a foot ring. Super easy. You can be sculptural with that if you want to. But if I take this off, I now have a little bit of an elevated bowl shape. So here's the goal. Our goal is to make these bowls here. We're going to be for the community. We'll eventually be glazing them, but we want craftsmanship. So think about how you can be creative, yet make these also they can be sold. So here's a few different ideas. Here's one. Doesn't have a foot ring on the bottom, but they cut holes in there for little handles, right? Really pretty cool piece. Here's one, you guys saw this one, nice large size bowl. This one has a foot ring, but they also did some little bit of texture on the outside, very subtle. Don't carve too deep. Here's one where a student kind of played with that lip, kind of altered it a little bit, all right? So you can have some fun with that. When you're done, you're gonna bring it back to one of our NHS officers, okay? They're going to have a cart for you to put it on, all right? All scrap clay. We're going to save. You're going to ball that up, and we're going to put into a scrap clay bag. I have one here. I'll put that right in. Now, let me just go over one more thing to troubleshoot with. Okay, so I'm going to take some fresh clay out. Scrap clay goes in there. Hypothetical scenario. Let's say that as you're working, so here's my bowl, and an accident happens. Oh, crap, I don't like that anymore. Don't just take this and ball it up and roll it out again, okay? Go ahead, take this, put it in a scrap clay bag. We'll have one for you. Then get a fresh piece of clay and start from scratch, okay? That's number one. Number two, when you're working with the clay, we don't want to cut too deeply into the clay because that will create cracks or fissures, okay? So try to avoid using the knives or using a needle tool to draw designs in it, okay? We're either sculpting, okay, or to get it nice and smooth and keep it super simple. All right, guys, so when we are all done, let's talk about cleanup real quick, all right? Anytime you have a scrap clay, whether it be on a rolling pin, maybe it's on a tool, we just want to be mindful and put those things back. Remember, we have about 120 NEHS students and about 80 art club students, and so we have a lot of people using the tools. So do me a favor, something like this, take your finger and just clean that clay off. Do not run your finger down the edge. You may cut yourself, but if it's super dirty, you can just give it a quick little wipe down, all right? Just get most of that stuff off there so it's fairly clean, all right? That's not, I wouldn't eat off of it, but that's fairly clean, right? So if you have clay on the tools, take your fingers, wipe the clay off. If it's on the rolling pin, do me a quick favor, wipe that off as well. Just do some general cleanup for me. Water gets put in the sink, sponges, kind of rinse them out real quick. But once you're done, these all get put back in the appropriate place. Scrap clay again, will go into a scrap clay bag, right? Just kind of, we'll have one in each classroom. Put it there, ball it up, and we're good to go.